What's going on, everyone? I'm Bert.
And I'm Fonz.
And this is
Bert and Fonz.
The other day, you and I were talking about this idea, this concept that I found was really interesting. And I wanted to bring it into the podcast because I thought this would be a really good space to really get in depth on that conversation. Because I know that we just kind of highlighted it, but we didn't really get into it. And it was sort of this concept of how technology has grown over the span of like your lifetime all the way up and through mine, and then it was like just how it's been slowly permeating things as we go along, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually started with that Throwback Thursday post that I put on social media not long ago, and it wasn't a picture, it wasn't a photo like you usually do. It was just a quote that said, "All right, guys, I'll see you later. I got to go home because I'm waiting for a call." Which is something you don't hear anymore.
No, not at all.
It would probably blow somebody's mind, more than one mind away, because originally we did have phones at home, and that's the only place where you had a phone.
Right. It wasn't like this thing you kept in your pocket all the time.
Correct. So you're not waiting for a phone call elsewhere. The phone call is picked up wherever you are now. So the whole concept of having to go to your house where the phones were located, and they used to be shared, as you know, by the whole family.
Right.
It was
right.
not, like you had one phone at home. Maybe you had several different, what do you call them, terminals?
Or just like...
Or receivers or whatever.
Receivers, yeah.
So you could go in the hallway and pick up a receiver. You could catch your sister talking to her boyfriend, and then she would just yell at you across, "Hang up the phone!" Or where you would get the whole like, "Rob, telephone!" And you would have to go to where the phone was located in the house. And that is no longer the case, and hasn't been the case for like how long now?
Decades.
So you remember that, right? You did have a phone at your house, or did you always have a cell phone?
No. When I first came into being and remember us having a phone, we definitely only had one phone for a long time. Mm-hmm. And that was really interesting. Like there was a lot of that stuff where I wanted to like talk to one of my friends like covertly and didn't want my parents to know. If they picked up, unless you were really, really like into it and you were like listening for the cue, like the slight little click.
Yeah, the overt. It's not covert, like the stealthy.
Right.
Did you guys have? Sorry, did you guys have that thing where like you could see the cable from the phone go around the corner into a more private space, where like somebody was trying to have a private conversation?
Yeah, when we first started out, when we only had the one phone in the house, it wasn't like the rotary dial or anything like that. We were beyond that point, luckily.
I had that. That was my first one.
Really?
A rotary? Yeah, that's how my mom taught me how to call my friends when I was like 6 years old.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But our first one was actually just one where it was like, it was hanging on the wall and you picked it up and then you had like the big old spiral cable that went off to it. So if you wanted to go elsewhere to have a more private conversation, you had to kind of like go around the corner and then
you saw the cable.
You could totally see the cable like going around the wall and everything. But contrasting that to eventually getting my first cell phone and having like the freedom to walk around anywhere it was like night and day.
How old were you?
Probably 12 or 13. So it was shortly after my parents had separated, and the reason I actually got a cell phone was so that they could both be in contact with me.
Right.
But without, if I wasn't there, but without necessarily having the other parent like
police your calls
exactly.
And
it was very freeing, but as a young man at that time, I also noticed the implications of how I could start to use it to communicate with my friends, which I got in a lot of trouble of right off the bat, because back then you were paying by the minute.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Right. So if I used it all my minutes to talk to my friends instead of either one of my parents, there was some hell to pay for that one a couple of times.
Well, I did that when I got separated with my daughter. Like I got her a cell phone so I could have calls with her.
Yeah.
Unmonitored.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. Like we did it pay by minute. That's the way that I could also keep tabs on her usage of the phone and stuff like that.
Very interesting. God, that just makes me think about all these different times. Like the first time of like taking calls and like having to navigate being in the house with my parents and everything. And, or if I needed to call somebody and they were on the phone, like my parents are taking work calls or whatever, and they like need to talk to somebody, they could easily pick up the phone and be like, "Hey, hang up the phone. I gotta make a call."
Yeah.
I couldn't do that as a kid.
Well, of course, yeah, because you don't have a say in the household. You're just
Right. But there were definitely times where if I picked up the phone and heard they were on, I was like, okay, I'll just wait until they're done. So I would just stay there.
So you would just snoop by your parents' calling?
Well, I wasn't snooping. Like I had it on mute, and then I would just like let it sit on the desk or something. But you could still kind of hear it coming out of the the speaker. Yeah, exactly. And so I'll just wait. And then it was always interesting. There were a couple of times where I went to do something else and forgot about it, and I would come back, and the person they were talking to didn't hear them hang up, and so they thought the conversation was still going. I'd be like, "Hello, hello, are you there?" Like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Hang up.
Yeah, those are fun times. I don't think anybody, like my daughter, for example, is, she's born around the turn of the millennium, and she doesn't have any of those experiences. I mean, she does remember, I think when she was a baby, we did have a phone in the house, a landline, but she hardly remembered using it. And what floors me is the stark difference in situations where I went to school my entire childhood without that. Like the phones were at home, they were landlines, versus my daughter who got a phone for me when she was 9 or so,
Right.
maybe 8. And she informed me that they had a ban in the school bus for texting. So that just totally blew my mind. That was so foreign for me that the kids would have a ban from texting, because that's how they could, communicate. And they had like this little underground going on in the school bus behind the adults' back, because they could just text one another. And so the adults expressly had to give them a ban on using the cell phone. So it just blew my mind that a bunch of 8-year-olds would have access to a cell phone. And I just could think all the kind of mischief that we would get into had we had access to that kind of technology.
Right.
Because
I even remember how big of a deal it was for my birthday one year. My parents got me my own landline.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Like a separated line from the house. So I didn't have to worry about that anymore. Like I had my own landline.
How old were you?
15?
Wow. Yeah, when I was 15, I don't think my parents thought I had any human rights either. So that's amazing. 15, that must have been like a big step for you, right?
It was liberating to know that they trusted me enough to give me that, but I think it was also because they got really tired of me interrupting their calls, or their not being able to like make their calls whenever they wanted to. So it was liberating on both parts, essentially.
That's a nice tactic, though. Just be a pain in the butt until your parents just
it was also a great tactic if I got in trouble, and that was the first thing to go if I was to like get grounded. They're like, all right, well, we're taking the phone line away from you.
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, but
curtailed.
I got to coordinate with my buddies. Like, we got to go out and do the thing. And they're like, I guess you're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way and walk over to their house.
So you didn't get grounded. You just got your communication means confiscated.
Grounded for me at that point was they started to take away the technologies or the different things that I had. I mean, that was at that point in my life.
But you could still go out, though.
I could still go out of the house. I just lost all the comforts that I had that kept me wanting to stay in the house.
That's interesting. We were just in prison. You just couldn't leave the premises, period.
When you got grounded?
Yeah. It was just like, you had to serve a term.
Right. I think that was also a point in time where my parents started to notice like a shift in where I wasn't going outside as often. And they wanted to encourage more of that. So they're like, all right, taking away all the distractions at home, and now you have to go outside if you want to do anything. Go play in the yard or something. But that's just sticks and dirt. You used to love sticks and dirt when you were a kid.
That's awesome. Good for them. It explains a lot. Come think of it.
What does that mean?
I'm just giving you crap. But I think that's a great thing for them to do. Just make sure that you're going out there and not depending on technology as much.
Right, exactly. And forcing you to go out and play. And I think that even holds true to this day with my little brother.
Right.
So my little brother is 18 years younger than I am, which not necessarily something that was planned for, but I mean, we're all really, really glad that he's here because he's amazing.
My brother's 16 years my younger, just as a reminder.
Oh, so it's not it's not that uncommon then, or not different, because when it first happened, it definitely was like, oh, this just doesn't happen.
Right? No. It's no. That we're talking about having a difference in age with our brothers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because the only thing is like my brother's probably older than you, and this is a little bit off topic, but I just want to drop that out there. You might become a real close friend with your brother in adulthood. It's funny because I remember my brother. I remember I have two memories of him completely distinct. One is the child that I would hold up and treat like a little kid, and I would take him to the fair and sing him songs. And the other is my buddy. We have beers and we talk about stuff. And they're kind of separated in my head, like I have to join them on purpose.
Right.
And he has the same thing with me. Like I'm his buddy, and we can give each other crap and all kinds of stuff. And then on the other side, there's this other side that's a little bit, I'm an elder and I'm authoritarian in some context. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so weird to think that tactic actually still works and is way more effective now with my little brother. Simply because he's connected all the time through some sort of technology, always.
Right.
He can't leave the house without having an iPad, even if they're just going to like the grocery store. Because for some reason, the time in the car on the way there, having that amount of time without being connected drives him insane.
That's like torture for him?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Just the thought of a road trip or being in the car for an extended period of time, and we're talking 5 minutes or longer, something is needed to keep entertainment, to fill the quiet, to fill the downtime. There is some sort of content or media or whatever, like it needs to be absorbed.
You know, it's interesting. I find myself a lot of times if I'm waiting for a table at a restaurant or something and everybody's looking at their phone, I find myself looking at the phone too. But what I do immediately is when I see everybody else doing it, I try to put the phone in my pocket and just stare off in space and deal with the initial discomfort of 30 seconds of feeling awkward. Uh-huh. And I have to say here, I think it's important for me to point out that I'm really not new to this. Like I was carrying a laptop and doing social media before everybody had a smartphone. Like I've been working in tech all my life, and my father's from IBM, so I've been related to this. You could say that I'm a first generation. So I'm not just talking as an older guy who's like, oh, this is foreign to me. None of it is foreign. You're the
original early adopter.
Yes, I've grown up with all of it, so it's not that foreign to me. But I still feel privileged to have known the time where you could just put your hands in your pocket and stare at the barman.
Right.
While you're waiting for your table. Just stare at the bottles behind the guy and just count them. And I try to do that. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And I try to do that today, so.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that ties into like a little piece of what we were talking about before. We were talking about how that all kind of related into industrial era versus the information era.
Right.
And how like we've sort of like spanned that gap essentially.
Yep. The industrial era to me is what started with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century or late 17th century maybe. So the Industrial Revolution that took place more so in the Western world was back in the time of the Victorian British Empire, and where like big machinery and big factories took over, and the progress was determined by this new technology built by machines. And then the digital era or the information era is when we start relying on the internet, where communication and information globalizes, so to speak. So when through the internet and through technological advancement of communication devices, there's this revolution in communication brought by the internet, which pretty much debunks, just overthrows television and print media as the biggest communication media of the time, and establishes the internet as a big medium that completely changes the way we interact with each other and the way we have access to information. So you and I were born in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And that's the tail end of the industrial era. And then the beginning of the information era is what determines the world we live in today, right now. So just wanted to make sure we defined that.
No, I think that's great. And just to have that sort of clarification to know that, like, you and I both started, even though we're I think 29 years apart or so.
I think, didn't you say once that when I was born, I think maybe that might have been a couple years ago, you said when you were born, you were the age that I am now?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And what were you, what, 27, 28?
I was 27 at that time, yeah.
So, yeah, so I was 27 when you were born.
Right.
So that's our age difference right there.
27 years.
Yeah.
And we're still part of the same tail end of the same era.
Right.
Which is sort of mind-blowing to think about.
And so what's interesting, we have that overlap,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And yet there's not exactly, it's not a one-to-one.
Well, there are some things. So, like, I don't know if this would be a one-for-one example, but, like, I remember the first time I got a computer in the house.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, like, growing up before that point without a computer in the house or even knowing what a computer was until it got to a point where my mom's work was trying to get into computers and kind of figure out what is this whole new computer thing? What is this internet about?
Maybe there's a future in this computer thing.
What is the internet really?
Uh-huh.
And how can we utilize that for our business? And so it was her being in marketing, like, okay, you get to take all these special classes we're going to pay for, and that also means that you get to have your own computer at home. So our first computer at home, I don't know, I think that was probably around 95 or so.
Uh-huh.
But it was, I just remember that coming into the house and like it being a special occasion. My parents like, all right, like we've got a computer in the house now, and
Mm-hmm.
it being like this big deal. And I didn't even know really what that was at the time. I was so young at that point. Like, I knew it was something new, but I had no idea at that point what it really meant.
What? Right. Okay.
And so that was a very interesting thing to kind of like experience, looking back on it now anyway, experience that, and then seeing where things are now to the point where, I mean, I have a freaking computer on my wrist that is more powerful than that computer was that came home that day.
Right.
I mean, we're talking floppy drives, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, so my first one, my first computer, I think I did know how big it was going to be because, like I said, my dad was an IBM guy, so I remember him in the 70s coming to the house. And back then, computers were things that would take up a full wall and would be managed by people in long white lab robes, and they
Like
would
the
have
big
these
server rooms and everything.
Yeah, these big spools. Is that what you call them? Spools of tape.
Yep.
And they would just put them up there. And my dad worked in IBM back then, and he comes to the house one day and he has a little model. And it's a cardboard model that shows what I thought was a desk with a TV on it and paper rolling out of it and some kind of typewriter in front of the TV. And he says, "This is the personal computer. This will be in everybody's house in the future." And I look at my dad, and of course my dad didn't explain things all that well, so he would say, "So you put data through here and you take data out of this." And I was like, who's going to want a data in out machine in their house? Because he'd explain that. So I just told him, I'm like, you're nuts. But so I remember my first computer was,
nobody's ever going to want that.
right. So my first computer was kind of it was an AT that sounded like a helicopter. And we can talk about that a little bit more later, but it was really funny because it was like state of the art. But now you think about it, and it's like I said, it's just thing you just power up and it goes like, and it's like something's going to take off any minute,
Yeah.
But I wouldn't compare it to, I think the comparable experience to your first computer for me is my first television.
Really?
So I was born, there was no TV in the house. So we were like a couple of years, like just bitching and moaning at my parents, the two kids.
So TVs were around. There wasn't one in the house.
Yeah,
it wasn't common.
not everybody had one. Right. So I was born, and I think in the States, because this is the 60s, in the States, they were a household item. But in Europe, not so much. So in Europe, some people had TVs, fancy people had TVs, but not everybody. You could still play it in the street. There was radios. Every house had a radio, or two, or three, but not a TV. And I remember we just kept begging our parents to get a TV, and they finally got one when I was like around 5 years old. So that was the big one. It's like, come see what's in the living room, and I would just go running there, and boom,
Right.
there's a TV. Wow! And I remember it was a black and white TV, and they were showing a bullfight, like all Spanish stereotypes that you could think of. There was a bullfight on that.
Sure, yeah.
There's only two channels. One channel ran all day, from
Like 8 in the morning to like
8
6
a.m.
p.m. or
to
so.
midnight or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And then channel 2 only ran in the afternoon, and that was it. Channel 2 started after lunch, and it just ran for a few hours, and that was it.
No 24-hour programming for those channels. though.
Nothing. And people would be glued, and of course, we watched what was fed to us, and that's another story. But that would be my analogy to your first computer.
Right, that makes sense. That would be... Yeah, so we were about the same age when these pieces of technology entered our lives. Like yours with the TV, mine with the computer. Just a very vastly different thing. You mentioning that, just thinking about it, it's really interesting to know that between yourself, me, your daughter, and then my brother, we have like this 4-generation time period, essentially.
That spans both eras.
Right.
The industrial, the information era.
Right, and to go from something where it was literally you had nothing to like really feed off of other than going out and hanging with your friends, or if you wanted to talk to people, like it was going to communicate with them.
Or you sat in front of the tube like some, comatose idiot and just watched whatever they fed you.
But not to the degree that it is now with my brother. And I think it's a really interesting dichotomy.
Right. Well, and you could argue too that the technology your brother has can be interacted with. Ours was more passive, but then by the same token, we had a lot more access to free. We were a lot freer in that. Let's do this. Why don't we do a timeline game? Let's play a timeline game. And between you, myself, my daughter, and your brother, let's call my daughter the millennial.
Okay.
Even though you're technically a millennial, but she was born
Technically, yes.
at the turn of the millennium. So,
Right.
And you weren't, so you were...
She is quite literally a millennial.
Right. You're more of an old fart in that sense. You might be a millennial, but you're a
I
millennial.
am an old soul.
Yeah, that works. Okay, so let's do myself, Fonz, Bert, which is the old soul millennial, and then we got
Yes.
the real millennial. Let's call it that.
And
Would
then we
be
can
my
do
daughter,
my brother, who is now part of what they're calling Gen Z.
Gen Z. Yeah,
It's what takes place after millennial.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they call, what the idiot that make up those names call the next gen. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're out of friggin' letters now.
Gen 0.
Or is it going to go into Gen AA?
Well, what is it?
Because whoever's making these names is an expert at Excel.
I think the next one's going to try to use an emoji, and it's going to be funny.
It's going to be a
I'm
poop
looking
emoji or
forward to
something.
yeah. Gen poop with eyes. Let's play this game, and we're just going to go through timelines from the industrial era, the tail end of the industrial era, the 20th century. I'm going to go through my timelines, and then we're going to see how they compare to yours. And we're going to pick up when we're going to look at the millennial's life and my daughter's timeline. And we're going to go all the way up to your brother and just reminisce and, just reflect on how things have changed.
I like that. Okay, so if we're going to do this, milestones. What would you say, would the TV be your first milestone then?
Let's pick the TV. Yeah, let's pick the TV because it's a big one. It's a big technological milestone. It's in the mid 1960s. I was born in the mid 1960s.
Yeah. You were still fairly young at that point.
Very.
So.
I was probably four years old. So
Okay.
I don't remember any technological advance before that. So yeah, you're right. Let's start with that. So my first TV was in the second half of the 1960s. What were you up to then?
I was not even a thought on the radar.
Okay, so you weren't with the program yet. So okay, let's see if you can catch up. So I'll go to the next milestone then. My next one would have to be, let's see, we had TV. The first pocket calculator.
Really?
That entered the house like in the mid 1970s. And we thought it was so cool. It was like a Star Trek kind of thingy. But it's one of those gizmos that you could hear the clack of the keys. And some of them would get stuck, And then we would have like all these jokes where we would make it say error.
Right.
And sometimes you could spell things with numbers and then turn it around and they spelled jokes and stuff.
Boobs.
So, yeah, that I guess in English. In Spain, we had a couple others. that I don't
Oh,
remember
I didn't even
right
think
now.
about that. Like how that could take off between different languages.
Right.
That opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah, we could spell some stupid crap in Spanish. You know some Spanish. So yeah, I'll have to look that up, and we'll talk about that another day.
I do.
So, what were you doing in the mid-70s?
I think my parents were for sure dating at that point again.
Okay, so you were already a threat to humanity.
Yeah, you could say that.
Good. All right,
I was on the scope.
so we're getting closer then.
We're getting closer. Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
cool. So we have, what's that, the second milestone? Mm-hmm. Third milestone, I would have to say would be, okay, early 80s, first VHS deck.
Really?
First video deck, because back then we had also Betamax, if you'll recall.
Oh, I do. Yeah, yeah.
Which was a better format. And they just lost the war. They actually, what I learned actually.
Was
in
that the one
film
with
school,
the giant disc?
No.
No. What was the Betamax?
So Betamax is a smaller. Betamax is
This is how you know I'm young.
smaller tape. I think it's less. I think it's 3/4 inch. Don't quote me. I actually studied this. So
So was it closer to like a cassette tape size then?
It was a little bit smaller. It was a little bit smaller than VHS. It was higher quality. But what happened when I studied in film school was that Sony and Ampex, I think, was doing VHS, or I remember who was doing VHS. They actually decided to split the market. So they did a treaty, so to speak, after a format war. And Sony kept the professional market using Betacam. So televisions were using Betacam format and retired Betamax from the domestic market.
Okay.
And then VHS or Ampex, we should look it up eventually, but VHS retired trying to get a stake in the ground of the professional industrial format and concentrated on domestic. So that's what happened.
Right.
So that would have to be the early 80s. And I'm guessing you're still like, your parents are getting married then or something.
Early 80s, I think they were talking about having me at that point.
Okay.
So we weren't quite there.
So working on Bert.
We're really damn close.
So Project Bert is now in the work since it's not defined as yet.
Can we not refer to me as being Project Bert in the
Project
works?
Bert in the works.
If you
All
catch
right.
my drift, that's
Okay, but that
I don't
was,
want to think about that.
that's good. Okay. Erase. It's erased. Right around the end of the 80s is where I got my first computer.
Right. So that was so that right there, that's when I was born. It was
Right.
the end of the 89 or
89.
so.
Yeah, that works. I don't remember if it was 88 or 89. I know that some of my peers, because my dad worked in ABM, thought that I had missed the train.
Really?
Because, well, back then I had left home for a few years and I was away from technology. And so I was introduced to that back again. My kid brother, who we've mentioned, who was 16 years my younger, is a toddler then. Barely a toddler, just, no, he's beginning to be a young kid.
Right.
And he can use the flight simulator like no one's business. That impressed the crap out of me because I didn't know where to start. And we talking about floppies, we had I think it was the 5.25 inches.
Yep.
The actual ones that would flop. That
Yes.
weren't the hard small ones that came out later.
Yep.
So that was my first computer. And one thing before we jump onto your birth is back then 4-colored personal computers were state of the art, but my parents had a 16-color.
Damn.
So even though, so I had been living away from the house and not speaking to my dad for a few years, but that year we made an attempt to try to reconnect, and so my brother, so I had access to his computer for a bit, and I learned how to use it for college and stuff, and
Yeah.
so and then I helped my father in our attempts to reconnect, rekindle the relationship. I did help him with a couple presentations. Because that was the artsy. So you could say that's my first dab into computer graphics.
Yeah, to designing, essentially.
And here's the big milestone that I had forgotten about. The biggest milestone of all, the undo function. So however being a person that was in my drawings, my technical drawing, I could get really messy and I had to just crumple everything and throw it away and start again. To Control Z, there wasn't a shortcut then, it was just undo.
Right.
But when I found out you could undo something you had done, that was like I was hooked on. That was exactly. That was like a big
literal mind blow.
Yeah. So that's the biggest. I think that's the biggest milestone, and your birth, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a little more important.
So yeah.
So that would have been right around the time that I was born, and so I guess the first milestone for me would be the one that I talked about before. Would be actually seeing the first computer come in to my house. And at that time, not realizing it, but again, since we're like looking back, like I slowly started to become kind of aware of like how big of a milestone that actually was. And actually thinking about it now, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous how much of a milestone that is comparatively. But I would have to say, like, my next one after that would be, I think, my first gaming system.
Okay.
And that was like the first personal gaming system that was brought into my home. Now, as far as gaming systems go, because there was all kinds of ones that happened for earlier computers and that kind of stuff. My first one wasn't until the PS1. And so that one I thought was like pretty high cutting technology at that time.
Okay.
That probably was right around 96, 97 or so.
Okay.
And so it wasn't.
So let me go back a little bit there. Though.
Yeah.
Because so with your first computer, I think what year did you say that was?
Oh, good point. I think that would have been. I think I said 95 before or so.
95?
Yeah.
Okay. Because in 91, so I started doing 3D graphics, 3D computer graphics in the 90s.
Okay.
In 1990, sorry, the turn of the 90s, and then 91 I started doing my first gaming, and we did first shooters. So I'm just trying to overlap with your timeline here a little bit.
You mean first person shooters?
First person shooters, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you call those first shooter?
You said first shooter.
That's what I said.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Okay, first person shooters. So Wolfenstein 3D,
Yeah.
Doom, and Duke Nukem, and then Doom.
Duke Nukem.
Yeah, Duke Nukem was such a hook that I self-intervened and I stopped playing games in 1993 and never have played since.
Really?
Yeah, that's why I'm not a gamer. But we've talked about this a couple of times, and that's why I can't relate to some of the game stuff. With other stuff, I can understand the interfacing and the graphics. You know, I still stayed with that. Mm-hmm. And I just want to overlap with your timeline here and bring another milestone, which is the sound card.
The sound. Yeah.
The sound card, because we had these like we had PCs. That's all we could afford, and we had these little sounds that were all like the MIDI sounds, that were like really electronic and dweeby.
Yep.
And then the sound card came in, and we had a little garage where we worked from. So I had a little company back then with another two guys. We did 3D graphics for television and for architects. We would do architectural walkthroughs and stuff like that. And we played Doom. We played Doom at night, and because we had the soundboards, people could hear the actual screams, with the chainsaw. Rah! And our neighbors were just like, they were completely appalled because they didn't know what those three, weird, like stoner-looking kids were doing in that garage when all these screams would come out at night.
Right.
And it was us just playing these.
Because at that time, it was revolutionary. It was cutting edge. People didn't have it in every house.
No one expected, yes, exactly. And no one expected a computer to make the sounds of a television. That's the big milestone.
Yeah.
Computers hadn't had the power to do so earlier. So this is the first time a computer can sound like a movie or a television. So no one knew those screams were coming from our computers. They didn't know where they were coming from. All they saw was three stoner-looking kids go down into a garage. And then, after a few hours of something, they would get all these screams of torture coming out from and then the kids would come out, and happily leave.
Versus me a few years later getting the PS1, and one of the first games my dad got for me was actually the first Jurassic Park game that had come out.
Oh, wow.
Because that was right around the time Jurassic Park had come out. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing. I still love that movie. But in that game, like, there were sounds of you, like, potentially getting eaten by dinosaurs.
Where just
the
like, raptors.
And all of this stuff, and that brought me such joy to like crank that up on the TV, just like have these sounds going. And God, my parents hated that for a while. But one of the other games that I got, that my dad got for me, because it was ultimately like a Christmas present, like it was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I think honestly, one of the reasons that my dad got me this gaming machine at this point was because there was a new NASCAR game that had just came out, and both he and my mother are huge NASCAR fans.
Oh, right. So that makes total sense. Yeah.
To a degree, I get, but I just never got into it like they did. But anyway, so there was this new NASCAR game that came out, and I think he secretly wanted to play it too, so he got it for me.
Yeah, and it was one of those presents for, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it became a bonding thing for us.
So
at
when
a
you
certain
get
point.
your girlfriend the sexy lingerie.
Um,
I got a
kind
present
of.
for you. So sorry. I mean the parallels.
The idea is
works.
the same. Yeah. But that became a real bonding experience for me and my dad until he realized that I was getting much, much better than he was, and I could whoop him at almost every race that we did after a certain point. Because my hand-eye coordination was better. I was smaller.
He didn't like that.
No.
Yeah, that's how when my brother would destroy us at Duke Nukem, like all three of us, he would come to the garage and play.
You said at that point you were already kind of like out of the gaming scene. Like you had purposely removed yourself from it.
I had to.
Right. So
It
then,
was eating me alive. Seriously.
So you weren't part of the big revolution that came next, which is probably my next milestone, which is the handheld gaming stuff.
Okay. No, I was totally out of that one. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the handheld, like when I first got my first Game Boy, I think that was probably the next big one.
Right, yeah.
Because that was, now you got to take all the games that you could potentially play at home. Like the graphics weren't caught up yet to what it was on the PS1 or like to anything. Like I think Nintendo 64 was out right around that time too. But just being able to like take games with you to play was huge.
Oh, right.
Like having a gaming machine in your pocket. And I think that's right when the first Pokemon game came out.
So you guys went mobile.
Yeah, we went mobile.
So you went from so you were before. Just explain a little bit again. So before you guys were pretty much tied to the couch. If you wanted to play,
right,
you had to be at some. So we're back to the whole like I'm going home to get a phone call versus
exactly. I'm going home to play a game. Now it's like no, I'll just take the game with me.
Right.
Like we can all meet up and play the game at the park or whatever. Or as it later became school, which we had some issues with that once. The school kind of caught on to like, oh, we have these personal gaming machines now. I think some kids tried to get away with having it as a pocket calculator at the time because
I love how like
design was one on one.
Kids are going to try to get around the system, like
right.
It's a human thing. You're going to try to get around the system.
Yeah, you're gonna push the envelope. You're gonna try and get away with shit that you shouldn't get away with.
Right.
But I don't know. Looking back, it was actually kind of genius for the first couple ones until they caught on, and then anyone after that, it's like you're just an idiot trying to pull that prank again.
Right. But I mean, yeah, no, that's is totally understandable. I had this one guy. So this is old tech just for laughs.
Right.
I had this one guy like right before we were college age. So like the end of what is it? High school, I think is the equivalent year.
Probably, yeah.
Right before college, right?
Junior high or so, probably.
No, this is like at the end of high school. This is right before college, the last year before college, 17 years old.
Oh, for you, okay.
Yeah. So, and there was this one guy. So they let us have calculators in some exams. So I'm talking math, maybe chemistry, physics. And then this one guy had this smart calculator who could do a lot more things and could hook up to his Walkman. So on his cassette, he could actually get data in the cassette and put it in the calculator. I don't know how he did it.
What?
But he was pretty much reading. So he was cheating on the exam because he had all kinds of like formulas that you weren't supposed to have memorized or anything. The calculator was just for last calculations. The whole deduction and the formula and the problem solving skills.
Like
that
everything to get to that point.
Right. And I don't remember what the deal was, but he was like, he could actually, so we could borrow his calculator. We were all like reading stuff. We were scrolling through this little strip of,
the little text on there and everything.
Yeah. We just had text. It was like a ticker tape.
Yep.
And we'd just be scrolling stuff because he would put it from his Walkman. He was like, oh no, I just have the Walkman here. It's for, I'm going to listen to music later in recess. So that's how we cheat. That's how we got around the system. So yeah, it's kind of like
it's always coming around then.
Mm-hmm. It's always It's more low tech than your example, obviously, but yeah.
Kids are smart. They will get around stuff if they can.
That's what. Yeah, I've actually just jumped back to 1981. I think that's that's what. Yeah. So let's go back to handheld gaming devices.
All right. So we had the handheld gaming, and I think that was pretty close to the same time actually as when the internet really took off. And I mean, we're talking like mainstream.
That's
internet.
the big milestone there.
So that you're saying that is the flip point.
That's inflection point of industrial. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
From industrial era to informational era.
Right.
It's the internet going mainstream, I think.
Right, because that was right when we were starting to be told that we could use the computer as a tool to like go on the internet and do research for like school papers or, a number of other things. Some of us, that was when we started to figure out what chat rooms were.
Right. Internet relay chat. Sorry. So what was it? Merc, and is that how you guys call it? MIRC? We called that Merc directly.
No. The fact of actually one of the first ones I remember us using was AOL Instant Messenger.
Oh wow! See, that was so mainstream. That's because you were kids. We were using,
of course, we were all using the free discs we got in the mail.
Right. Yeah, no, we were using IRC like hardcore.
Right.
And there was some like chat rooms. We were talking with Australia about stuff that is not pertinent to bring up in this here podcast.
Not today.
But,
not today.
But talk about the Wild West in terms of information and access to communication.
Exactly.
Stuff. It was crazy. Yeah.
But just, God, I remember that too with the magazines that would always come with those freaking AOL discs that were like, start your, 1 month free trial, blah, 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 blah. And if you just made a different email address each time, you always had 1 month free of AOL to go off.
I heard of that. Yeah. See, that happened in the States only. In Europe, those were really restricted.
Really?
For us. Yeah. It was like, why is this? Oh, because it's one of those American things.
Okay.
It's like, because I can't get on this with, there were some like user groups that you can get on, and I don't know, there's like weird stuff like that. So
right.
I feel like we had a more open net, more dangerous, it wasn't, but
dangerous.
We had access to a bunch of stuff. Like the user groups back then was.
Yeah.
That was huge,
Yeah.
And IRC, there were two clients. One was MIRC, which we called Merc.
Okay.
And the other one was, I think, C something IRC.
Yeah, that was not anything that I think even knew about.
Oh, Merc and Perch, PIRCH, and they all stood for like Platform of Internet Relay Chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was all like
Hula Baloo
acronyms.
So that's what that was. And Merc was, I don't know, Massive Internet Relay Chat, or like, I don't know, Murky Internet Relay Chat.
Yeah, so we just had like the AOL Instant Messenger chat rooms.
Nice.
And then there were other sites that, I don't even remember what sites I would go to, but they were just like websites that were strictly hosting like chat rooms sort of stuff. And that was when I first started to figure out what like forums and stuff were.
Nice, yeah.
And like trying to build up a community of friends that you may never meet, but it was cool to like have this connectivity now. Mm-hmm. And then shortly thereafter, now that I'm starting to get the hang of it, is the Y2K stuff.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
The world is going
doomsday.
To end.
Yeah.
Because it was the end of the Mayan calendar or something like that?
It was, no, that's 2010. That's a different story.
Okay, okay.
No, Y2K was what, I'm going to try to explain it, but look it up online.
Well, all I remember from that is that it was supposed to be like all computers shut down.
Yeah,
and
because
that's really
the counters, because they hadn't built the counters in the computers to go beyond 2000. The year 2000. It was something like that. So in the hardwired part of so I don't know if it was the ROM or the read-only memory of computers that all the PCs, it was said that they didn't have a way to go beyond the year 2000. So I think I'm summarizing it pretty good, but look it up.
Okay.
And the contention of Y2K was after the year 2000, all of those computers were going to stop working. So the software, everything was just going to stop working. And so everything that was connected was going to go to hell, and it was going to be doomsday. And what I do remember is coming to the States. I was like fresh off the boat then. Like I've been like 4 years in the States or something like that.
Sure.
No, wait, I'm sorry. No, into the year 2000, I was on my second year in the States. I'm sorry, I'm hallucinating.
So you're like fresh to the United States.
Really fresh to the United States. And I loved this diner. You know that diner in St. Paul that's like a wagon? It's like a tram wagon.
You mean like the train car?
Yeah, it's a train car in St. Paul. It's a diner.
Yeah, Mickey's Diner.
Mickey's Diner, yes.
Yeah.
So I love that place. And I remember walking in there, and there's a handwritten sign on the door that says, Mickey's Diner, Y2K compliant since 1950 something. I don't remember what the day was, but it was awesome. And that's my biggest memory of Y2K, because of course it all, like, how did it affect you? Because it all blew over, right?
Oh, we were just, like, I was a kid at the time. And so me and my friends were all making jokes about, like, oh, the world's going to come to an end. All the computers are going to shut down. And then secretly all of us are looking at, like, all of our, like, Game Boys and everything. We're like, all computers?
Except this one, right?
All computers? because I don't want to lose my games. That right there was like kind of my takeaway from Y2K. It was just remembering like parents freaking out, seeing it all over the news. Bunch of doomsday preppers buying out all the like canned supplies in the grocery stores and everything,
and doing target practice and getting the gas mask ready. Yeah,
I do remember my parents thought it was a lot of BS, but just in case, I remember my mom going out to the store and buying copious amounts of bottled water. Just in case.
So they did buy into it. Well, yeah, it's prudent.
Well,
it's
they to my face, they're like, nah, it's nothing. Yeah. And my dad was a firm believer, like, because he had been working with the government for a long time, and so I'm sure he was privy to a lot more tech stuff than I, will ever be. Mm-hmm. So he was like, that's total crap. But my mom, just in case, just to be safe.
You never know.
Right.
Well, that's smart. So I think we just hit timeline number 3. Because that's when.
So this is like
millennial.
About when my
daughter was born.
Okay.
My daughter was born in '98.
Okay. So it's just a little bit after that then. So she's around at this point.
But I mean, we're at the turn. Yeah, we're at the turn of the millennium. Yeah. So my daughter's a little toddler. She's really cute. I mean, she's 2 years old.
Right.
There's still a landline at the house. We have a personal computer at the house. We have internet at the house. So all of that is a given to the millennial.
So now she is born into all of this, just being in the home. Right.
And I'm trying to overlap it. So we still have the landline at home.
Okay.
But now we're beginning to have cell phones. It's not normal. We didn't have a cell phone each. My wife and I didn't have a cell phone each then. Mm-hmm. I think there was one for emergencies that had to be hooked up, and we didn't have a plan with it, so we had dropped the plan, but we still had the device or something.
Was that like the big brick cell phone?
No, we'd already left the big brick. That was a smaller brick. It's still a brick.
Still a brick.
But it wasn't like the big brick. I remember the 70s, the first, is it freehand? Wireless. The first wireless phone. It was a landline, but it looks like a big walkie-talkie like this.
It actually had like the big antenna, right?
You had to pull it up, otherwise you didn't hear crap. and we thought that was so slick. And it looked like a walkie-talkie that you would see in the Second World War, medic, you know what I mean? But we thought it was the coolest thing. So no, jump back to...
so it's a smaller version of that, which is still like the...
It's kind of a blocky thing, but it's smaller, but it's, like a little toy walkie-talkie looking thing.
Sure.
So let's just recap. At the birth of the millennial, we have landline in the house.
Yep.
We have VHS.
Yep.
We have CDs for music. We have a computer, personal computer. Mm-hmm. We don't use a cell phone. There is a cell phone, but it's we have to hook it up to a plan. It used to have a 4-month plan. We let it lapse. It's for emergencies only, and it's shared by the whole household.
So it was around, just not widely used.
Yeah,
or
it's
like that,
kind of it's an interesting electronic accessory at that point. It's not a given. So that's our situation. How about yours?
My experience with cell phones at that point was again not a given thing. It was definitely an accessory, but that was also shortly after that, right around the time that I mentioned before, like my parents got split up, and so I got my first cell phone, which was like this little Nokia brick thing, which didn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It still had like the 2-color screen, so like green and black, which you could play Snake on. So there was that.
Yeah, you got Snake. Yeah, I remember Snake. So, and this is what year we're talking about there?
This would have been 2002, 2003 or so.
Okay, so then around this time is when I think the big milestone there is the Palm Pilot.
Okay.
So the first handheld planner device,
The personal assistant.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
So I remember that came around. I didn't have one, but I was already in the business, so I was already doing UX.
Sure.
User experience. Called it interactive design back then. And you had like the first, the early adopter, couple of douchebags like interrupting the meetings with a little thing and tapping importantly about stuff that they could have written on a piece of paper. That was cool. But what was cool about that, and we'll talk about this, I think we want to talk about design in another episode probably, since we're both designers. But
that'd be great.
Yeah, I think one of the, and remind me to bring this up, but one of the biggest milestones there is as designers, the experience of actually designing the Palm Pilot, which is something that I've read and studied a little bit, is fascinating. So we'll talk about that. Yeah, but that I think is the other milestone, because I think it precedes the device-centric era. So the Palm Pilot and the personal assistant devices start to show a little bit of what's yet to come.
Right, because it starts to give that. I mean, it's not directly correlated at this point, but that's sort of like early smartphone type of stuff, like being able to take all of that with you, right?
Correct.
Like just having it in your pocket, having it wherever you go.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and spoiler alert about the designer conversation that we're going to have. The guy in charge of designing that device walked around with a wooden block in his pocket, the size of the palm pilot that they were intending to release to the market, to see
How comfortable?
how you experience. Yeah, if people would be able to experience normal life just carrying a little tile in their hand. So he would have different blocks
Interesting.
that he would walk around in his daily life.
Just as like a demo sort of thing.
Yeah, just to see, like, will people be able to live with one of these things all the time? So that's an important milestone right there
I'll have to put a pin in that one and
from
come
the
back
inside.
to it.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm sure you won't forget because we do this, so you'll remember. But I think that's a huge milestone there that's not as well known.
Right. So then what would we say the next milestone would be? Would that be, God, probably DVDs? Would DVD be the next one?
Now, DVDs were around for a while, but
Well, I mean like mainstream, like taking over
Yes.
VHS.
yes, absolutely there. So, yeah. So I think at that point,
Starting
VHS...
to put Blockbuster, like having to have them shift their whole thing. And,
Yeah, exactly. You start seeing it on the shelves. You
Right.
start seeing everybody starts having a DVD player now.
Right.
People's VHSs start being relegated. So they
Right, because they started, with VHS, like one of the reasons that we started switching to DVDs was like with the VHS, people would watch them so much, they were literally burning them out.
magnetic tape wears off.
Right.
So the emulsion of the magnetic tape wears over time. So the more you watch a VHS tape, the more you listen to a cassette tape or a spool, the more quality loss there is.
Right.
Digital, until the disc deteriorates physically,
Mm-hmm.
the signal always has the same fidelity because of how the digital signal. We can go into that into detail another time if you want to, but because of how the signal is stored,
Mm-hmm.
there can be no interference. It's either 1 or 0.
Right.
And there's a way to explain how that works, but there is no quality lost out of wear. But I think that's the time. What are we talking about? Like mid first millennial?
Yeah, so this is
2005,
probably
so-
like 2008, 2009.
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit. I think a little bit sooner than that. It's a little
Sooner
bit
than
early.
that?
Yeah.
God,
So-
I'm trying to remember back when.
Because people are still holding on to VHS just because it has that quality of the books where you can see it on your shelf.
I guess that's
And
true.
you have the
Like,
collection, and people are still trying to cling to that.
Right.
But eventually they let go and they start putting DVDs in its stead.
well, once people started to like really put a lot of effort into like the DVD cases, and when they became standardized and everything, it's like, oh, have you got the latest movie on DVD?
Right.
Oh.
Right.
So much better than the VHS.
Yeah, and the sound quality, everything was just a lot better quality. So I think
Right.
that happened there, and I think the next milestone would have to be cell phones. Like everybody actually carrying the flip phone,
Flip phones.
The flip
oh, yes.
also known as the oyster phone in Spain.
The clamshell.
Yeah, the clown phone. Yeah,
God, flip phones. That's a blast from the past. I remember flip phones. My dad first got his first flip phone, and he was so proud of it. And it was like this kind of like chunky, like it was like a half brick sort of thing. You split open, and now it's like a nice, relatively
yeah.
like piece.
And everybody acted so
with like
important with
the
them.
antenna piece on it. and all that.
Yeah.
I actually, my first flip phone was the Motorola Razr. The Motorola Razr, I think, is honestly like, it was the peak of design for like flip phones back then. Mm-hmm. And it was just so sleek and sexy. And I remember when I got that one, like showing it off to my friends at school, and I was like, check out my new cell phone. Like, I'm cutting edge. I'm cool. I've got the latest and greatest. Feeling all good about it.
Did you take pictures with it yet or not yet?
Oh, you could take pictures. They were shit pictures, but
I remember I posted one of my selfies as a Throwback Thursday, like
from one of those
a few
phones.
a few years ago, and somebody commented, it was really funny. Somebody's comment was like, "I had forgotten how blurry you were back then."
Everything was
really funny.
blurry back then.
It was funny, yeah.
So we did flip phones. What would be like the next big one then?
The
Because I
iPod.
feel like the iPod.
The iPod.
Oh,
I think, right?
yeah. No, that's a great
Discman
one.
and Walkman out the window. The
Right,
predecessor
right.
of the iPhone right in the door. So
Right, and now we're starting to have like those disk drives in our pocket. Because I remember the first iPods like had the disk drives because you could like put it up to your ear and hear it whirring.
oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's why they were like so thick and chunky because they had to accommodate that.
Well, if you tried to go jogging with that thing, it would just like jump.
It would skip all the time. It was like having a Walkman, kind of.
Well, the Walkman was better because the Walkman didn't skip. So that's why the Walkman took a while to.
You didn't have a Walkman. Are you talking about the cassette player? Or are you talking
about the cassette player, not the
I'm talking about
Discman.
the Walkman that's the Discman.
That's the Discman. The Discman would jump, the Walkman wouldn't. So the reason the Walkman didn't phase out that fast was because of that.
I mean, but the iPod at least was better about it.
Yeah, sure.
Like if you were just walking, it wasn't too bad. It was like, but if you were like jogging or running or high impact, that's where you had the potential to have it skip. Luckily, unlike a disc, it wouldn't scratch it, and then like you'd have that same problem on the same track all the time. You know?
Right. Yeah. and there's another advantage of it, the design change.
Right.
Of just a little wheelie thing instead of a keyboard. That was revolutionary.
Yeah, so that was huge.
Yeah.
Was having your entire interface built off of a scroll wheel and being able to just like navigate that way.
Mm-hmm. And that's how a lot of companies learned how they could. I think a lot of designers and a lot of companies learned how they could implement such a big paradigm shift on the general public so fast.
Right.
That's what's really interesting.
So this would be, I guess iPod would be right about the time that my little brother was born. And so that's when...
So we're talking now like what?
So now we've sort of like jumped to that...
2005, 6, something like that?
Yeah, right around that time. And so that would have been like Gen Z sort of era. Mm-hmm. I think there's some overlap between millennial and Gen Z still
Obviously,
there.
right,
but
yeah.
like what is considered now Gen Z, like he definitely falls into that. And I just think that's... The iPod is probably right around when that happened. I mean, it was also a big thing happening then with social media.
Right.
Like for me personally, it was everyone getting into MySpace. Mm-hmm. And everyone had to have like their MySpace pages and decked out with like the, whatever was the latest and greatest songs that you could put music on your profile pages that would autoplay when people showed up. And
and you had Tom be your friend.
Yep.
Tom would be your friend.
I think that was actually my first intro into like web design, because you got to design your page, your MySpace
page, right?
And then try to figure out hacks to like do the cool
reverse engineer the CSS.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like the CSS from hell. It's famous for that.
But yeah, so that was like my experience going on with social media at that point. Was definitely like the MySpace, like social world. What about you?
Right. Well, so in MySpace, it's funny you say that because MySpace is.
Did you have a MySpace?
Actually, oh yeah. So remember, like I'm an older guy, but I'm a first generation digital dude. So I had a MySpace.
Not everyone had a MySpace.
I was in an agency then, and my creative director was crazy. She was saying MySpace is the place to go.
Okay.
So she was all over social media, and it's to me it was really just seeing how the forums that you just mentioned and the internet relay chats come together.
Right.
And shortly thereafter, we just dropped. So MySpace became the dweeb thing, and everybody got on Facebook. And Facebook was cool back then. Fancy that, like Facebook being cool. I actually predicted when it was going to turn into a dweeb thing too. But so that was kind of fun. Yeah. So we had Facebook. We had LinkedIn, which I still am. I still have that account. I've dropped the Facebook and the MySpace ones.
Yep.
And then there was Friendster in Europe. There was WhatsApp came shortly afterwards, but Friendster was the guys that began. No, FriendFeed. I'm sorry. They began the thumb.
Oh, that's where that started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then Facebook bought it, and then they brought the. So I have my old Facebook archives because I'm not in Facebook anymore.
That's where it all started. The big like wars.
But here's the thing. So I have my Facebook archives of 10 years of Facebook before I dropped off.
Right.
And the first years don't have likes. So if I look at my archives and I look at all the comments and the posts, because I still have them locally saved to my hard drive, that was, so all that stuff happened then around, I think I would say 2005 to 2007 was the huge social media
And that was right
stuff.
around the time that then smartphones started to take off.
Smartphones,
Right?
yeah. So the iPhone is released, I believe, in 2006, or I start seeing them around work in 2006 and 7.
Right.
2008, I start feeling the pressure of getting one, and I believe my first one was either 2008 or 2009. My first iPhone. And I wanted to go a different route. I didn't want to do an Apple one, but back then, because I had to study apps, that was the biggest app
Right.
market was in iPhone, so I got
Right.
an iPhone. So what about you?
My first iPhone probably would have been around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
Right when like the 3G came out.
3G is 2009-10, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's when I first got mine, and I remember having the Razor up until that point, and just like the night and day difference it was to go from that phone to an iPhone to a smartphone
Yeah.
that could like do all this different stuff, and it was just
Yeah. And you could post on your social media feed.
oh my god, trying to figure out how to use apps in the first place
Send
was
pictures.
crazy.
Yeah. I had the Samuel L. Jackson app and the beer drinking. Did you ever have the lightsaber app? That was super funny.
Of course I did.
That was so funny. And you just wiggled it around like
Yeah, you tap a little button and it's like
Yeah.
and if you like tap two phones together it would like
Yeah. It was so stupid and so fun.
and a great way to break your phone.
Yes. I bet. And then would you say tablets is the next one, or
As far as big milestones go, I would say I personally think tablets would be the
because
next
to
one.
me tablets was just like a bigger iPhone. I found that so stupid.
I mean, technically, it just kind of is, but it was also a big revolution as far as like personal computers went, because instead of having to carry around this big chunky laptop all the time everywhere, because I mean, this is before like the MacBook Air and all that stuff, where they started to like really streamline that. The tablet was like a computer you could take with you anywhere.
I carried a laptop with me on a backpack like Elliot from Mr. Robot.
Yeah, but how heavy was that thing compared to like having just an iPad?
I go to the chiropractor. Yes, but then again, no, I see what you're saying, and I hear you, and I think you're absolutely right. But then the thing that I had against it is you can't save stuff on your iPod. On your tablet. You can save a lot more stuff on your laptop, and it's more yours.
Right, because at that point,
You're forced
they
on
had
it.
gotten rid of the ability for you to like use it as a hard drive, right? So it was like it was just whatever you could get at the App Store,
Right.
or like download from whatever you can get from that. It wasn't you could like upload stuff to.
Right.
It anymore.
You could get little clouds that you could use, like Evernote, like the original apps from then. You could save stuff on the cloud, but yeah.
God.
So that's your next milestone of Gen Z.
Yeah, I think tablets would have been a good one. Or I think another good one would actually be the rise of Siri and Alexa.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And just like this idea of no, Alexa, calm down, go away. Alexa,
Artificial
stop.
intelligence. Is Alexa waking up? There you go. So, speaking of the devil, artificial intelligence.
Yes, and the rise of having like this personality to interact with. Because I remember when Apple brought on Siri to the phones, and just having all of that.
The conversational UI.
Right.
The whole conversational UI.
And,
thing,
and starting to think of that, because I mean, it's the call and response, and being able to program it to attempt to give you the answer that you're seeking.
Right. The self-learning algorithms and ontologies of self-learning ontologies. I don't know if that's the exact right term. We'll have to ask our friend, the taxonomist. You know how I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
But I was actually reading about it the other day because I had to work. It was a work-related thing. But yeah, so Alexa and Siri would be, I think, the big milestone. I think that the latest one would have to be smartwatch.
Smartwatch.
Which I purposefully stay in dumb watch.
Yeah, but there's
it's a
something
cool watch.
like, and this is,
But it's a dumb watch.
but it's just there's something classic and timeless about having a piece like that.
I just use them because they match my belt and my shoes.
Well, yeah.
Like,
I
pull my smartphone to look at the time.
I started using a smartwatch a couple years ago, and I was really late to the smartwatch game. But when I started to see how it was connecting everything that I used on a daily basis regardless, and then would just serve it up to me, like instead of trying to pull my phone out or open up my computer and figure out, all I had to do was this. And it was right there.
Right.
And that
Hooked.
blew my mind.
Right.
There was a period of time recently where I had to take it off for a long period of time because I realized that I was just doing this constantly throughout the day. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, hold on. Is it? Okay,
Right.
okay, yeah, keep going. Oh, hold on. Okay, yeah. I just had to make sure it wasn't important. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it got so annoying to the point where I was annoying myself. So I can't even imagine how much I was annoying other people.
I think actually you've hit a great point there, because I think that this is the limit of the smart technology, and it compares really well to Google Glass. So like, how much do you want your device to take over your life?
Right.
And how much can you afford to let your device to take over your life? That's, I think, an interesting thing that we might want to talk about some other time too.
Yeah, but it also shows us just how integrated it's become into like,
Right.
the day-to-day stuff. I mean,
Exactly.
let's go back. Think about my little brother, who cannot go for a 5-minute car drive without having his tablet to like watch something, consume something, anything. Like, he cannot do it, and that's just blows my mind to go from that and then think about all the way at the other end of our spectrum here.
Now we're at the beginning of the time.
You know, full circle, we're coming around. And just to think about, like, that just wasn't even a concept. That wasn't even, like, science fiction writing at that point.
Right. Well, in fact, Gmail recently sent me an email saying they had taken all of my flight information from my reservations that I had on the email confirmations,
Right.
and put them on my Google Calendar
Right.
without my permission, and informed me that I could opt out of that option. Now, when I was growing up, you needed a court order to read somebody's mail. But now Gmail, whatever I've signed to have the Gmail service provided to me,
Yeah.
understands that by default they can read everything I have there, and I have to opt out. It's not the other way around. It used to be that you had to opt in.
Interesting.
So that has happened. And
Huh.
so in my era, you needed a court order. In yours, you had to opt in. And now, in Gen Z, you have to opt out.
Huh. That's, ain't that some shit?
Yeah. Is it 1984 yet?